Hi guys, hope you're keeping well. This will be a different video this time around. So, there's been a statement posted online by the composer of the Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal soundtrack, Mick Gordon, and he posted it on his, on medium.com, and the statement begins as follows. This statement is issued in response to id Software studio director Marty Stratton's Doom Eternal OST open letter, published on Reddit on May the 5th, 2020. Marty lied about the circumstances surrounding the Doom Eternal soundtrack, and used disinformation and innuendo to blame me entirely for its failure. Afterwards, he offered me a six-figure settlement to never speak about it. As far as I'm concerned, the truth is more important. Marty's Reddit posts severely impacted both my professional and personal reputation. In releasing this statement, I'm exercising my right to defend myself. It is a defense, not an unprovoked attack. Issued with extreme reluctance only after all other attempts to resolve the matter have failed. This statement is not an excuse for a hate campaign. Acts of hate dished out online won't result in any positive change. In fact, it only makes things worse. Very, very interesting. Very damning, actually, towards Marty, the statement itself that Mick has put out. Quite detailed. Lots of examples of different meetings he attended with id Software, meetings he attended with Marty, some screenshots of email exchanges, some screenshots of kind of wave analysis in terms of the music that was kind of released by id. Where Mick felt that it was done a disservice. He mentions another employee of id, Chad, who I believe worked on, or he was the lead kind of sound person within the organization, who kind of then had his name appear as co-artist along Mick Gordon, even though he didn't obviously write any of the music. I'll post a link to Mick's statement on the video as well, description, just so you're able to kind of go through it. But it's very lengthy, and I've got to say, when I first heard, or when I first read Marty's statement, in terms of the soundtrack not being released, or his frustrations, what he felt that Mick had missed deadlines and the product that they believed they would be receiving hadn't been received, and therefore they weren't able to put it out there for consumers. I was on the camp of Marty Stratton when he put that out. I felt, or I could feel the frustration that maybe, Mick made it very clear at the start that there was a certain timescale, and then that wasn't adhered to in the end. With Mick's statement now, and the fact that it's so much more detailed and goes in depth in terms of his feelings throughout the whole situation and some of the facts that he throws in there as well, I do sympathize with him a lot more, and I come out of it feeling like this has been a situation that has had not very good management, or poor management, I would say. And it might not necessarily have been on purpose, to be honest. I think one thing I want to just try not to get into too much is the characterization within Mick's statement of some of the meetings and some of the character that he brings into question in terms of Marty. Just because I'm very aware that characterization can be very subjective. None of us were sat in a room with Marty, or had a Skype call with him, or were in any of these conversations that occurred, or various meetings that Mick was in as well. So we don't know how things maybe came across, how they were actually meant or intended to land. It could be that people kind of read it in a different way, or assumed that it was done in a certain manner. It's hard to tell. But one thing is for sure, is that it's very damning of Marty's character, and it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of this. You know, whether id release something, or Marty releases something, or whether something even more serious happens. I'm not really 100% sure. I think it sounds to me that a lot of the issues and frustrations that Mick was having according to his statement, were around, first of all, unrealistic deadlines. So he feels that the original timescale that was put in place was very ambitious and maybe not necessarily centered in reality. But the thing to remember with big projects is that you normally do start with a timescale in which you think, okay, well, we're releasing this in 3 years. We think that by year 1 we'll be hitting this, year 2 that, year 3 that. But normally what happens is that obviously your idea at the start never matches 100% with reality, so things change and things fluctuate. And that plan normally needs to be quite flexible, because then it allows you to be reactive to things that come up as you go through it. So I think Mick's frustrations was that he suddenly at some point could see that these deadlines were incredibly unrealistic, and he wasn't going to be able to provide an element, the kind of the amount of output required at the certain level required if those timescales were kept. Especially as it wanted music that matched gameplay, and according to Mick, there wasn't really any gameplay available that he could go off, so he had to almost like compose blind to start with. And I think a lot of his frustrations come from the fact that he raised some of these issues early on trying to get some of those timescales and those plans resolved, or changed or altered slightly, and he just felt that that wasn't being received in the right manner, that he was then being seen as someone who was kind of creating an issue or just not being capable. So that sounds to me like a classic case of mismanagement, and how many times maybe have you heard it where there's a manager who tells an employee to do X, Y, Z by certain deadline, employee starts doing it, they start realizing that it's not realistic, they feed it back to manager, and the manager is just very bullish about it and wants them to stick to their deadlines, and therefore there starts to create a bit of a rift and create an element of stress. That sounds like what's happened here. I think the difference is that it could have been managed differently, but also I think with very big corporations, with big products like something like Doom Eternal that have very strict deadlines, is that I think there can be a lot of strictness in terms of when things need to be done. But one thing is clear from Mick's statement is that he never seemed to be asking for a change of the final date. It was more the kind of the dates in between. So in terms of the kind of work that maybe needed to be done throughout that time period, where he just felt that he was being asked for unrealistic things. It leaves me with a bit of a sour taste, if I'm honest, because it doesn't paint Marty in a very good light. It doesn't paint the management of it in a good light. Mick mentioned some other kind of employees as well who are involved in meetings where maybe the way things came across or the way they acted didn't sound great. But again, I do appreciate that a lot of these things can be very subjective, and it'll be hard to know, I think, the nuances of some of these things and how things really came across. But it's definitely an interesting statement, and I just think that a lot of this stuff could have been avoided if managed differently. I think I was quite shocked to hear really that Mick hadn't been paid in like 11 months. And he mentions his family a couple of times, and this was like his main source of income during that period, and he was working extremely long hours to try and meet unrealistic deadlines and not seeing any money for it for a very, very long time. And then also it appears that id Software ended up using double the amount of music that he was paid for. So Mick was paid for X amount of hours of music, and then they used almost double that, and he hasn't had payment for that element either. So much so that it sounds like then for the original soundtrack to be released, that was never something that Mick had a contract for, and he wasn't getting anywhere with his software, so he felt he needed to go above them to Bethesda, and that's where he was starting to be able to get a contract in place for it. But it seems like id Software behind the scenes had already started working on the OST soundtrack quite a while back, of their own accord by simply kind of, as Mick says, I think something like, copy and pasting different files, joining them together, crossfading them in different ways. But according to Mick, done in a way in which it wasn't very professional, and in a way which misrepresents, I guess, his music and the effort he's put in. And it obviously aggravates him, that this other employee in id Software, the lead sound designer, Brad, appears as a co-artist on those things, because obviously Mick putting so much work into the music, creating it from scratch, and then suddenly having someone else at the last minute come in almost as a credited, almost on an even keel with him. I can completely see how that is just not right. I expect there to be a bit more, well, much more of a build-up about what's just been posted. I don't know where it's going to lead. I don't know if Marty will respond. I don't know if id will respond, or whether something even more serious will come from this. One thing's really clear, is that I don't think Mick will be working with id ever again. So whether you were a fan of his music or not, I think I really can't see a way back in terms of this. And I just hope that things just get cleared up, to be honest. There's probably an element of at fault from both parties, but the more I'm reading it, it seems like more of a mismanagement issue here, and very poor communication, and then possibly not a very good way in which to go about communicating this information and making someone like a freelancer like Mick Gordon kind of feel part of a project, or in this case made to feel not really as part of the project and a bit of a spare part. So yeah, I'll just finish by saying this, that I find it kind of ironic really that a lot of the times Doom Eternal, I think, was mentioned, especially by Hugo, as it's a game about poor management. Samuel Hayden, Olivia Pierce, all these people who had to do certain things and they didn't do them right, and in the end it all unravels slightly and leaves a sour taste in people's mouths. And it's just ironic that that seems to be the case here as well. So thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll catch you all very soon.